There was no speech, no clenched fist statement for the cameras, no dramatic pause for the headlines, just a tight jaw, a hard stare, and the kind of heavy silence you only see when someone realizes, too late, that the game is over. What you're watching isn't simply a prince leaving a building, it's the exact moment a high-stakes gamble collapses in real time. Prince Harry walked into the UK's highest court expecting vindication, expecting the law to validate a crusade he's carried for years. Instead, he walked straight into a legal buzzsaw. The doors closed behind him, and with them went more than a case. A strategy collapsed, a narrative unraveled, and the ruling didn't just refuse his demands, it exposed the weak joints in his entire plan. He arrived looking for catharsis. He seemed to expect the court to treat pain like proof, as if trauma could be exchanged for judgment the way it plays in interviews and streaming specials. But he ran into one brutal truth. This court doesn't trade in emotion, it trades in evidence. And when the ruling landed, the air in that room didn't explode, it drained, quietly, completely. Don't click away, because what the mainstream press will call a setback looks a lot more like a financial and strategic disaster when you trace the mechanics. In the next few minutes, we're going to break down the time bar trap that undermined the case, the staggering bill he may now face, and the uncomfortable comparison that surfaced in court. How Prince William dealt with a similar problem years ago without turning it into a public war. Harry wanted a battle. He got one. Now he may have to pay the price. To understand why Harry left with that thundercloud expression, you have to rewind to the moments just before the final judgment was delivered. In high-stakes litigation, defeat doesn't always arrive as a speech. Sometimes it arrives as a look, an almost invisible signal that tells you the cliff edge is already under your feet. According to accounts from inside the room, there was a heart-stopping moment where the collapse became obvious. It happened in a pause, one of those short silences that feel longer because everyone understands what's at stake. The atmosphere wasn't just tense, it was weighted down by years of grievance, public pressure, and the kind of money most people never see attached to an argument. Harry sat there, seemingly hoping for a moral reckoning, hoping the system would finally acknowledge what he believes was done to him. But his legal team saw something else. Witnesses described a quiet disintegration of confidence. No shouting, no theatrics, just small tells, fingers tightening on the desk, a brief exchange of eyes between barristers, a subtle lean-in that didn't need words. No notes passed, no frantic paper shuffling, just a look, and then the glance downward. In the coded language of courtrooms, that movement can mean only one thing. It's finished. Why did they know? Because moments earlier, the presiding judge, Mr. Justice Fancourt, asked a question that sliced through everything Harry had been leaning on. Harry had spoken for hours about betrayal, ethics, and the broader sickness he sees in tabloids and celebrity culture. He wanted the court to weigh the morality of it all. He wanted the system to judge the harm. But the judge didn't ask about feelings. He asked about timing, a technical, procedural question, dry, clinical, almost boring, until you realize it's the kind of question that ends cases. Why are we hearing this now? That's when the room changed. Harry looked down, not with the slow slump of surrender, but with disbelief, as if he'd just realized he'd been arguing one fight while the court was judging another. He thought he was battling for moral truth. The court was looking at a calendar. His team recognized immediately what the judge was doing. He wasn't buying the emotional framing. He was focusing on a legal boundary, the statute of limitations. The exchanged glance wasn't just panic, it was recognition that their client's catharsis was about to slam headfirst into a time bar. This is the tragedy of mismatched expectations. Harry walked into that courtroom believing status, history, and grievance would force the law to bend. But that look between lawyers said what the court would soon confirm. In the High Court, facts don't care about your story, and statutes don't care about your title. Harry may have been the last person in that room to fully absorb it. While he waited for validation, his lawyers were already calculating consequences, and as you're about to see, the consequence wasn't limited to reputational damage. The judge wasn't merely dismissing claims. He was setting Harry up to collide with a mechanism that can cost a fortune. If the look was the warning, the time bar was the weapon. Call this the time bar trap. And to understand why Harry stormed out, you have to understand the one thing he refused to accept. The clock had already run out. In high-stakes litigation, there's a concept that sounds unglamorous but ends empires of arguments: the statute of limitations. It's not poetic. It's not emotional. But in this case, it functioned like a blade. Under British law, you generally have 6 years to bring a claim after you discover you've been wronged. Harry's legal team argued that he was a victim of unlawful information gathering tied to Newsgroup newspapers, the publisher behind The Sun, stretching back to the mid-2000s. Do the math. We're sitting in the present day, and he's attempting to litigate events that reach back nearly 2 decades. By standard legal measurement, that is late. Not slightly late, catastrophically late. But Harry's side had a response, and it was explosive. He didn't deny the delay. He argued he was prevented from acting sooner, and this is where his strategy tried to drag the monarchy itself into the center of the story. He claimed there was a secret arrangement, an informal, behind-closed-doors deal between palace figures and newspaper executives, supposedly designed to keep the royal family out of open court. According to this claim, he was effectively told, "Stay quiet now, and a settlement will come later, at a time chosen by others." It's a narrative that fits perfectly inside Harry's worldview. The institution protects itself. The press holds power, and he's the one stuck in the middle, controlled by forces bigger than him. He boiled it down to a simple idea: I didn't sue because I was told I couldn't, and the entire case leaned heavily on that proposition. If the judge accepted that the agreement existed and genuinely prevented him from acting, the time bar could be lifted. The clock could be stopped. The door could reopen. But then came Mr. Justice Fancourt's ruling, and it didn't just disagree. It dismantled the argument piece by piece. The judge's approach, in essence, was blunt. Where is the proof? No signed document, no written contract, no emails confirming a grand pact. The core evidence was Harry's recollection and assertions. The ruling noted that details around the alleged arrangement were vague and inconsistent. Even more damaging, the court observed that lawyers involved in earlier periods didn't appear to be aware of any ironclad deal that supposedly controlled Harry's hands. Then the judge turned to the timeline. The court found indications that Harry had knowledge about these issues years earlier. He consulted lawyers in the past. He wasn't an uninformed bystander with no options. He was wealthy, well-connected, and surrounded by elite advice. The ruling's implication was devastating. The delay wasn't caused by captivity to a secret agreement. It looked more like delay, hesitation, and lack of follow-through. The court concluded there was no factual basis to stop the clock. Harry waited. And because he waited, he lost the right, at least in large part, to fight. That's the time bar trap. Harry walked in believing he was pursuing a moral reckoning. The defense pointed at the calendar and argued a cold line. Even if wrongdoing occurred, you're too late to litigate it now. It's cynical, it feels unfair, but it can be legally valid. And once the judge sided with that position, ruling that the vast majority of claims were time-barred and therefore struck out, the case didn't just weaken, it collapsed. The deeper tragedy here is that Harry seemed to believe his identity as a royal victim would override procedural rules that apply to everyone else. He appeared to expect the court to accept his account of a secret arrangement because of who he is. But the High Court delivered a different message. In law, a missed deadline is a missed deadline. The court treated the secret agreement not as a shield, but as an unproven excuse. And with the bulk of the case effectively thrown into the past, Harry is left with consequences that hurt far more than pride, because when you lose a massive chunk of a case on technical grounds, you don't just lose face. You lose money. A lot of money. And that brings us to the next chapter, the one that hits where it hurts most. Not in the heart, in the wallet. If the time bar was the trap, then the costs order is the punishment. Harry left the courtroom visibly rattled, but the damage still to come may be far more severe. Call this the billionaire's calculator. And to understand the scale of the disaster, You have to understand a brutal feature of the British legal system that many people underestimate. The loser pays. Unlike the United States, where each side often covers its own legal expenses regardless of outcome, the UK system frequently operates on a harsher principle. If you sue and lose, you may not only pay your own team, you can be ordered to pay the other side's costs too. So when Harry's claims were thrown out as time-barred, the loss wasn't merely symbolic. It potentially opened the door to him reimbursing the publisher for the cost of defending those specific claims. And the numbers in cases like this can be shocking. High court litigation at this level can burn through millions of pounds across both sides. You're dealing with elite counsel, long preparation, mountains of material, and hourly rates that climb into the stratosphere. Even at earlier stages, the costs can be eye-watering. We already saw how procedural defeats can trigger immediate orders. Now widen that to the scale of this dismissal. Harry could be facing a bill large enough to chew through a meaningful portion of what he earned from his memoir and related deals, money that many people assume is limitless until they see how fast litigation consumes it. And here's the part that reveals something unsettling about the strategy. It reads like financial arrogance. A belief that resources can overpower rules. A belief that money can push institutions into submission through pressure and attrition. Harry may have thought he could outspend the tabloids. He may have believed he could drag the fight out until the other side blinked. But he's up against an opponent backed by a vast media empire with deep pockets and hardened legal teams. They can afford the long war. They can afford to wait. They can afford to win on procedure. The irony is brutal. Harry says he's fighting to stop the press profiting from his suffering, yet every technical loss risks turning into a payment to the very machine he despises. Each defeat becomes a check written to the opposition. He funds their defense. He bankrolls their resistance. He subsidizes the enemy. That's not the behavior of someone calmly protecting a future. It's the behavior of a gambler chasing the last loss, doubling down, convinced the next hand will fix the previous one. But the house in this arena, the legal system, doesn't bend for emotion. It rewards discipline. And while Harry was pouring money into the furnace to prove a point, another royal faced a similar problem and chose a completely different path: quiet, strategic, and, in the end, profitable. While Harry was writing checks, William was cashing them. Court documents revealed a detail that changes the perspective of this entire fight. Harry wasn't the only victim. Prince William was also caught in the same storm, but the way the two brothers handled it tells you everything about why one looks like a future king and the other looks like an exile. In filings connected to Harry's argument, it emerged that William settled his own claim against News Group newspapers in 2020, quietly, while Harry was building a public crusade. Behind closed doors, supported by palace lawyers, William negotiated a deal. The details remain private, but court material confirmed it involved a very large sum of money. He received compensation. Accountability was extracted, but it happened without the spectacle, without the public trial, without turning family and institution into collateral damage. This is a tale of two approaches. William played chess. Harry played boxing. So he used leverage strategically, reached a settlement, and closed the chapter. He won. William navigated the system. Harry tried to break it. The answer points to something the law can't provide, something money can't guarantee and judges can't order. He wasn't only chasing a legal remedy. He was chasing catharsis. But here's the tragic mistake. He treated the High Court like a therapy session. He treated the witness box like a confessional stage. In the world of celebrity storytelling, speaking your truth is currency. Pain becomes proof. Emotion becomes authority. Instead, he got a system response that can feel devastatingly cold. Timing, documentation, proof. They were debating whether they were still allowed to care, legally. Harry wanted a hug from the system. He got a lecture on time management. He wanted to be the hero slaying the dragon. Instead, he was told he filed too late. And as Harry stands outside the court, facing a mountain of cost exposure and a public unraveling, we're left with a final question that hangs in the air. What does a man do when he realizes the world doesn't automatically care about his truth? Sometimes the bravest move isn't fighting the dragon. Sometimes the bravest move is realizing the dragon isn't worth burning down your own castle to defeat. And now he faces a choice: escalate into an even more dangerous kind of conflict, or finally walk away. So here's the final verdict question for you. Is Prince Harry a man courageously fighting a corrupt system to the bitter end? Or is he a stubborn gambler, draining his fortune for a battle the rules won't allow him to win? Choose your verdict and be honest about it. Because the silence on those courthouse steps may be saying more than any statement ever could.